Hi, it's time for a cassette player recorder video. This is a Music and Sound Model CT, or more specifically, it's a Model CTG because it has gold buttons, because it's from the 80s and everybody likes gold buttons from the 80s. This is going to be sort of a reverse teardown overview talk about one of these. This particular unit is from 1988 or 1989. Back in those days, this was an accessory to a standard Music and Sound radio intercom master station. It could be paired with the Model N300 or N350 or N440 or the really fancy stereo Model N80. This was at the time referred to as the world's most expensive cassette player. So in 1988, the list price for just this by itself as an accessory was $498, and it was by far very fancy for its day, and in today's money it would be $1,300 or $1,400. Probably less than that because consumer electronics prices have always come down, but it was a lot of money to add to an intercom system at the time. This particular one does not work, and we'll talk about why that is and its future. And as you can see, the buttons are all kind of wonky and everything. That's because on the back side over here, it's all taken apart because it belongs to a customer, and we were exploring the possibility of repairing it. He decided that it wasn't worth it to him to have it repaired, so it has to be put back together. But this is a good opportunity for me to show you what this is all about. So it's a Music and Sound auto reverse play and record. And I actually got it to the point where I was able to eject the tape that had been stuck in it probably for decades. It has a mechanical tape counter here, which will reset to 0 finally. Since it's a player and recorder, it does have left and right microphone input. This is technically a stereo player recorder, because it could be paired with the N80, which is a stereo music intercom system. And I would guess that Music and Sound didn't want to have two different versions of this, a mono version and a stereo version. There are ways you hook this up to a mono set, so it works fine. It came with special audio cables that mixed right and left into mono. There is also a headphone jack. These are all very old school 1/4-inch jacks. So here we have, this is an 1/8-inch jack. This is what everyone's used to nowadays. It's a little tiny 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter plug. This is a very old school 1/4-inch jack. 1/4-inch jacks are what was common more back in the day. That would plug in like this. You can still use these if you have more modern devices, because you can buy all kinds of little adapters nowadays. So that's just an aside. So you have your microphone inputs, you have a headphone output, because, you know, back in the day, you might have headphones with a really long coiled cord that you could plug in and listen to something. That it's just an option. Down here we have a power button. It does have built-in noise reduction. Now, it's not Dolby noise reduction because they didn't license the use of Dolby in this product, but it is noise reduction. Noise reduction helps reduce the tape hiss that you get from good old-fashioned cassette tapes. It has multi-play modes. You can have play one side and stop. You can do play both sides and stop. Or you can do continuous play, which is each side over and over and over again. And then you also have repeat play, which it'll play a single song and then rewind and play that song again. Since it's auto reverse, you have both right play and left play. And auto reverse means the head spins around inside the deck, so you don't have to take the cassette out and turn it over and put it back in. You have fast forward, which is right fast forward and left fast forward, because remember, it's auto reverse, so it can go play in either direction. You have a pause button. You have a record button. You have music search, which would fast forward the cassette tape in whichever direction it's playing in, looking for that little brief amount of tape where there's no signal because it's between songs, and then stop there. And I think it probably rewinds just a little bit and then plays and stop. and then you have green and one red LED here. You have a music selection LEDs here, they're red LEDs, and you have 2 LED VU meters, because you have to remember this is the 1980s. No more of this analog VU meters with a needle that bounces back and forth. No, no, no. We have super fancy red and green LED VU meters here on the top. And then we also have record level adjustments here and playback level adjustments here. Of course, this is all taken apart. You'll see at the end, after I put it all back together, what it actually looks like. So let's turn it around and look at what's on the backside. Here we have a jumble of things because it's all been disassembled. It was necessary to disassemble it to get to the part on the board that I thought was the fundamental problem with it, and then talk to the customer, and the decision was made not to spend the time to repair it. And I thought, while I have it apart, it'd be a good time to make a video. So right here, we'll move this out of the way. This is the cassette deck assembly, and it's really, really hard to see because it's all encased in its folded metal covers and sheets and things. Sort of get that out of the way. There are 2 motors. This is the primary motor here that's responsible for the tape transportation mechanism. There are 2 belts inside of here. This one is a flat belt. The other one is also a flat belt, which you really can't see because it's buried down inside. There is a secondary motor right here, this little one. The purpose of this motor is it's the motor that causes the playback head to switch directions. It spins around as you play left or right, and that's what that motor is for. This, by all accounts, as far as I can tell, is a very high quality cassette player mechanism. It's primarily metal. It does have plastic gears and things, but they almost all do. It's a much better, higher quality cassette deck than what I would imagine most other companies used at that time. What would be mounted on the back of this is this board here. This board sits like this, and it has connectors that connect it to the rest of the unit. This is the motor control board. It does exactly what you would expect. It controls the motors and functions of the cassette deck. This is either a microprocessor or a microcontroller. It's most likely a microprocessor. I could not find a lot of information about this particular microprocessor. It is an NEC part, but data sheets are, the only data sheet I could find of any consequence was all in Japanese, and I don't read Japanese, so I can't tell you a lot about it. I know that it has PROM and it has 96 bytes of RAM, and I'm pretty sure that it probably contains the operating instructions for the cassette deck itself. I thoroughly inspected the cassette deck looking to see if there was some clue as to what company made it, because the cassette deck itself would not have been designed and manufactured by Music and Sound. They would have bought this from a commercial vendor that made cassette decks back in the day. And I'm pretty certain that, depending on the application, this board was probably a design that was supplied by the cassette deck vendor. The firmware or program that's in the microprocessor would have been something that they probably would have supplied to Music and Sound also, because if you think about it, we really want you to buy our cassette decks, and it's very fancy and it's very elaborate, so you need this to really utilize it well. And instead of your engineers spending all their time and effort trying to do this and design this board and write the code and do all like that, we'll do that all for you, and then we'll give it to you when you buy our decks. So it's sort of an incentive. Now we'll move on to more of the heart of the whole thing. So we're going to fold these back out of the way, and we're going to start at the bottom and work up. As in Music and Sound fashion, there's a lot of interconnect wires and cable assemblies between all the boards, so you can't really fully separate them. This board here sits here against the faceplate. It's the third board in the sandwich of 3 boards. This is referred to as the keypad board. There is a schematic and there are some drawings for this in the service binder. However, the technical information is a little limited. Some of this you sort of have to infer and make up on your own. So this is the keypad board, and it has the controls, the gold buttons that stick through the front of the faceplate. This is the power button, the noise reduction button, and the repeat play button. button. And up here we have our two LED VU meters. These are little like daughter boards. They're actually screwed to the main board, which is a nice touch so they don't move around. And what you have on here is basically it's a chip-on board. Underneath this little black blob of epoxy would be the actual integrated circuit die, and it was applied to the board when the board was manufactured, and then you have these very nice red and green VU meter LED assemblies. These would most likely have been made by another company, not necessarily by Music and Sound. They would have purchased them and then incorporated it into their overall design. The biggest problem with this cassette deck, the reason that it was decided not to repair it is, and I've made another video about this in the past, which I will put one of those pop-up things up here that you can go to and see how we deal with this, are these little tactile switches behind the buttons. There are 11 of them. These are more conventional mechanical latching push buttons. So there are 11 of these altogether. For the most part, they have all failed. And this is sort of a classic Music and Sound switch problem from these days. I've done a video about it before. This is one that I've actually taken off the board so you can maybe see. It's a little hard to see because it's really small. This is a little tactile switch with the stem that has the cross design on it, and the cross design fits onto or into the back of the button cap, which also has the cross design, so they fit together and it aligns the cap into the hole. These fail in usually one of two ways. Either they still move, as this one doesn't really. No, that one's collapsed. So they collapse so they don't push down and pop back up and push down and pop back up anymore. It's as if you were pushing all the buttons all at one time. And that jams up the way the deck works because it doesn't know what to do. This one actually would function in some small way once I got the tape out of the player, because it was kind of jammed in there, and powered it up. It would try to play in the right hand play direction, and it would try, and then it couldn't. So I assume it thought it was at the end of the tape, and then it would switch to the left hand play direction, and it would try to play there, and it would play for a few seconds, and then it would stop, and then it would switch back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's because if these buttons are all being pressed at one time, you're sending conflicting signals to the microprocessor telling it what you want it to do, and it doesn't know what to do, and. The decision was made, the customer's comment was that I don't even own a cassette, which is fair enough. So the decision was made not to replace all the switches, because the thing about this is it's obvious that the switches are all bad and they all need to be replaced, which is a fair amount of work. And if you watch the other video, you'll see what it takes to do that and get the caps on and all that sort of stuff. Because these original style switches with the little cross stems, these don't exist anymore. You cannot find them, you cannot buy them, they simply don't exist. So you have to put in a different style of switch with a different style of stem, and then you have to alter the back of the button caps to make them fit, and it's very time consuming and that therefore expensive. The problem when you have bad switches here on the control board or on the keypad board is that you can't judge or know if anything else is wrong with the cassette player at all, because the controls don't work. So you have to fix this to find out if there's anything wrong here, and then you've already spent a fair amount of effort to do this, and then you're gonna, if you find problems here, then it's gonna be more and more and more to do, and it becomes rather expensive. That's that board. We'll put this over like this. This one actually sits, I have to put it back together and put the one switch back on it, but this sits like this, and there's threaded screws and nuts and washers, of course, because it's Music and Sound. And then we have the power supply playback board. This half of it from here to here is the power supply for the entire set, and this is what I would call, there's no name for this board in the service manual, but this would be the record playback board. That's what I would call it, because it's got the record adjustments here, 2 pots, and the playback adjustments here. That's what I'm going to call it, is the record playback board. Not a lot to go wrong on this. One of the things I will point out towards the end, we're going to count here real quick. There are many adjustments to set up this player and recorder to make it work correctly. So on this board alone, there are 4, and they probably are related to these 4 pots here. There is two on this board, and this is to adjust the VU meter, the LEDs for the VU meters. So those have to be set up also. There's no other ones on that side. And then we have the audio board here. This is all audio related things here. And then on this board, you have another 1, 2, 3, 4 adjustments there. There's a lot of adjustments on this set, and if you went through the adjustment procedure, it would take a fair amount of time to do. I suspect that for most of these, unless something really unusual has happened to it, most of this wouldn't have any kind of serious problems. It would be more age-related problems, because this cassette player recorder is 35 years old, and after 35 years it would need some refurbishment. However, not as much as possibly the N350 master station that this is paired with. They both belong to the same customer, because the master station is on and working all the time, whereas a cassette player like this would only be on when you're using it. You wouldn't leave it on 24/7 thinking maybe I'll go play a tape real quick. You would go there and turn it on. So the more time it spends turned off, the longer the components will tend to last. So they may or may not need a lot of repair. It's really hard to say. It's really a case-by-case basis, but it certainly, I think, would be less than the master station would be. If you have one of these and it needs to be repaired, it's not going to be an inexpensive proposition. And one of the things to keep in mind is that while the electronics can all be dealt with, if you have mechanical problems with the cassette deck itself, with this part here, that's going to be really difficult. Belts are probably something we can source for any audio device that uses belts, whether it's a cassette player or an 8-track player, or sometimes turntables or older answering machines that use cassette tapes and things like that. Belts are becoming harder and harder to find because there apparently is less and less demand for them, so there's less companies that are importing them. They're almost all made overseas, and it's kind of a problem sometimes. Fortunately, the primary motor is a fairly common motor, so that's not an issue at all. The little auto reverse motor down here for the playback head, I don't know, I didn't spend any time looking to see whether I can find one like that or not, but that doesn't really get used that much, so I don't think that would be much of a problem. The bigger problem with the primary motors here, and whether this one would have that problem, this design would have that problem or not, is that eventually belts tend to disintegrate and fall apart. Sometimes when they fall apart and they stretch and they tend to have a tendency to turn into this black gooey tar stuff, it will get wrapped around the pulley on the motor shaft for the primary motor while it's trying to run, and it'll wrap itself around it and bind up the motor while it's still on and trying to turn, and it will burn out the motor. So with this flat belt design and all of that, it seems like that may be less of an issue. That's sort of a brief overview of a music and sound mid and late 80s Model CT cassette player recorder. So what's going to happen with this one? Well, what's going to happen with it is it's going to get all put back together, and we're going to try to be clever. So one of the things the customer asked about, which I thought was a good idea, was there some way that we can incorporate an audio jack on the master station so he can plug his phone or some external device into it. It's a little difficult in some installations, including his, because this unit is mounted in a wall housing. The N350 master station is mounted in the wall housing above it, and there's a wooden frame that ties it all together. So with the wooden frame and the way the faceplates are made, there isn't a place to like drill a hole and mount a miniature audio jack easily. It's a very difficult thing to do. The wooden frames are rather thick and it's all kind of clunky and doesn't work very well. So when we were talking about that, I told them, I have an idea. So we have these 3 jacks on here, the 2 left and right microphone jacks and a headphone jack. He's not going to use any of these because this doesn't work. So what I told him I can do is the jacks, and I like the headphone jack because It's the one here on the bottom. It's this one. I'm going to disconnect the wires from it, and I'm going to I'm going to solder onto it an audio cable with an RCA plug at the other end, and I'm going to make it long enough that it can reach up through the wall housing into the back of the N350 where it can be plugged into the auxiliary input jack. And then he can use, oh, it's upside down. All the electrons are going to fall out. He can use the headphone jack with the proper type of cable and use that to plug in his external music source. The jack will no longer have any connection to the rest of the cassette player. It's just a convenient place to plug into that's already there. And I thought that was a good idea. So that's what I have to put this back together, and then I have to do that. That'll probably be in a very brief follow-up video to this one. So we'll leave this upside down, let all the electrons settle down to the top of the set before I put it back together. I hope you found this interesting, and maybe for someone it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications. And every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.